My father's hand was cold when he grabbed my wrist. His fingers, thin as bird bones, dug into my skin with surprising strength. The morphine should have made him weak, but desperation gave him power. His eyes, sunken and yellow from the cancer eating through his pancreas, locked onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach drop. "Marcus," he whispered, his voice a death rattle. "You are not my son. You are not Sarah's son either." I felt the world tilt sideways. The hospital bed, the beeping machines, the smell of death and antiseptic, all of it blurred. "Dad, what are you talking about? The morphine is making you confused." "No." He squeezed harder. 19 years ago, I stole you from Boston General Hospital. I took you from your real parents. Your real father is Richard Thornton, the billionaire. I have been following them on the news your whole life. They never stopped looking for you." 3 days later, the DNA test confirmed he was telling the truth. My entire life had been a lie. My name is Marcus Sullivan, or at least that is what I thought for 19 years. I am a pre-med student at Boston University, working 2 part-time jobs to help with tuition, wearing second-hand clothes, and taking out loans for textbooks. Except I should not have been any of those things. I should have grown up in a mansion in Brookline. I should have had every advantage money could buy. Instead, I was stolen at birth and raised in a 3-room apartment in Dorchester by the man who kidnapped me. This is the story of how I discovered I had been missing for 19 years while living 20 minutes away from my real family. This is the story of meeting my twin brother for the first time and realizing we should have shared every birthday, every milestone, every moment. And this is the story of how becoming an adult meant making impossible choices about family, identity, and forgiveness. It started 3 weeks before my father's deathbed confession, on a cold November evening when the wind cut through my jacket and the early darkness made everything feel more desperate. I had just finished a brutal organic chemistry exam and was planning to grab pizza with my roommate when my phone buzzed. Mom. Her voice was shaking when I answered. "Marcus, you need to come home. Now. Your father is asking for you. The hospice nurse says it is tonight." My stomach dropped. Dad had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. We had known for 8 months that this moment was coming, but knowing something and facing it are 2 completely different things. I grabbed my keys, told my roommate I would be back later, and drove the familiar route from my dorm to the apartment where I grew up. Traffic was light, but every red light felt like an eternity. I kept thinking about all the things I wanted to say to him, all the conversations we had never had, because there was always supposed to be more time. The apartment building looked smaller every time I came back. It was the same 3-story brick building with the cracked front steps and the door that stuck in humid weather, but somehow it seemed to shrink as I got older and saw more of the world beyond Dorchester. I took the stairs 2 at a time to the 2nd floor, my heart pounding not from exertion but from fear of what I was about to face. Mom opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked like she had aged 10 years since I had seen her just 3 days ago. She was only 42, but grief and exhaustion had carved deep lines around her mouth and eyes. She pulled me into a tight hug, and I felt her body shake with silent sobs against my chest. "He has been asking for you all day," she whispered. "He says he needs to tell you something important, something he should have told you years ago." That should have been my first warning that this night would change everything. But in that moment, I just assumed it was the kind of sentimental, emotional conversation dying people have with their children. Maybe he wanted to tell me he was proud of me, or give me some final piece of fatherly advice. I had no idea I was about to step into a nightmare that would make me question every single day of my 19 years. The living room had been converted into a makeshift hospice room. The couch, where I used to watch cartoons on Saturday mornings, was now pushed against the wall, replaced by a hospital bed. Medical equipment beeped softly in the corner. The room smelled of antiseptic and something else, something I had come to associate with death, even though I could not quite name it. My father, Michael Sullivan, the man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and come to every single one of my high school basketball games, was barely recognizable. He had lost so much weight that his cheekbones jutted out sharply, and his skin had taken on a grayish-yellow tone that the hospice nurse had warned me about. His eyes, though, those were still the same deep brown eyes I had known my whole life. When he saw me walk in, something flickered in those eyes. Not just recognition, but something else. Something that looked almost like fear. "Marcus," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The morphine made his words slightly slurred. "Come here, son. Sit down. I need to tell you something, and I do not have much time." I pulled a chair close to his bed and took his hand. It felt fragile, like bird bones wrapped in thin paper. Mom stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The hospice nurse quietly excused herself, saying she would be in the kitchen if we needed anything. "Dad, it is okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though I felt like I might break apart. "Whatever you need to say, just take your time. I am here." He shook his head weakly, and his grip on my hand tightened with surprising strength. "No, you do not understand. This cannot wait. What I am about to tell you is going to change everything you think you know about yourself, about us, about your life." I felt a cold prickle run down my spine. "Dad, you are scaring me. What are you talking about?" He closed his eyes for a moment, and I saw tears leak from the corners and run down into his gray hair. When he opened them again, they were filled with something I had never seen in my father before. Shame. Deep, profound shame mixed with desperation. "Marcus, you are not my biological son. You are not Sarah's biological son either." The words hung in the air like poison. I felt my brain trying to process what he had just said, but it was like trying to read a foreign language. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "What are you talking about? I do not understand." 19 years ago, your mother and I were desperate," he continued, his voice getting weaker but more urgent. "We had been trying to have a baby for 7 years. 3 miscarriages. Thousands of dollars in fertility treatments we could not afford. We were told we would never have children naturally. The adoption agencies all had 5-year waiting lists, and we did not have the money for private adoption. Your mother was falling apart, Marcus. She was so depressed, I was afraid I was going to lose her. I felt like I was underwater, like everything was muffled and distant. Mom was sobbing openly now, her back against the doorframe, slowly sliding down to sit on the floor. I was working at Boston General Hospital as a maintenance supervisor, Dad continued. I had access to a lot of areas most people did not. The maternity ward, the nurseries. One night, I was fixing a heating problem in the newborn unit. It was about 3 a.m. There had been a multiple birth earlier that evening, twins to some wealthy family. All the nurses were distracted, running back and forth. The security cameras in that particular hallway had been broken for weeks, and maintenance had not gotten around to fixing them because it was not considered a priority area. I felt my stomach turn over. Dad, no. Please do not tell me what I think you are about to tell me. There was a baby, he said, his voice breaking. A beautiful baby boy with dark hair and brown eyes. He was in a bassinet by himself, while his twin was being examined by a specialist. The mother was in recovery. The father had gone to make phone calls. And I just thought about your mother at home, crying herself to sleep every night, looking at baby clothes online that we would never need. And something in me broke. Or maybe it broke a long time before that. And this was just when it finally shattered completely. You took me, I said flatly. It was not a question. I felt numb, like my body had been pumped full of Novocaine. You stole me from a hospital. I wrapped you in my maintenance jacket, he whispered. I walked right out through a side entrance that I knew was only monitored during shift changes. I brought you home to your mother. She was horrified at first. Wanted me to take you back immediately. But then she held you, and you looked up at her with these big, curious eyes, and she just fell apart. We knew it was wrong. We knew it every single day for 19 years. But we also could not imagine our lives without you. The room felt like it was spinning. I stood up abruptly, knocking the chair backwards. This is not real. This is the morphine talking. You are hallucinating or confused or something. This cannot be true. Marcus, please, Mom said from the doorway, her voice thick with tears. Please let him finish. You need to know everything. Everything, I shouted, and I never shouted at my parents. What else could there possibly be? You just told me that my entire life is a lie, that I was stolen, that somewhere out there I have real parents who think their child is dead or missing or God knows what. How could you do this? How could both of you live with this? We gave you a good life, Dad said weakly. We loved you more than anything in the world. We sacrificed everything for you. I worked 2 jobs for years to make sure you had everything you needed. Your mother gave up her career to take care of you. We were your parents in every way that mattered except biology. Except the law, I said bitterly. Except the truth. Except giving me the right to know where I actually came from. Your biological family, Dad continued, and I could hear the death rattle starting to enter his breathing. The hospice nurse had told me what to listen for. They are wealthy, very wealthy. Your father is Richard Thornton. He owns Thornton Technologies. Your mother is Elizabeth Thornton. They never stopped looking for you. I have been following the news stories all these years. They have a foundation dedicated to finding missing children. They never gave up hope. Richard Thornton. I knew that name. Everyone in Boston knew that name. Thornton Technologies was one of the biggest tech companies in New England. Richard Thornton was a billionaire, a philanthropist, constantly in the news for his business deals and charitable foundations. And I was supposed to be his son. You have a twin brother, Dad added. James. He was the other baby that night. You two were born at 11:57 p.m. You are 6 minutes older. There are pictures online, interviews where your biological parents talk about their missing child. They never gave up on finding you, Marcus. Not for a single day. I felt like I was going to be sick. I stumbled toward the bathroom and barely made it before I threw up everything in my stomach. I heard Mom come in behind me, trying to comfort me, but I shook her off. When I came back to the living room, Dad's eyes were closed. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was gone, but then I saw the slight rise and fall of his chest. There is a box, he whispered without opening his eyes. In the attic, behind the insulation in the northwest corner. It has everything. Your original hospital bracelet, newspaper clippings, everything I collected over the years. I could not throw it away. It felt like erasing you, the real you. Take the box. Get a DNA test. They have your biological family's DNA on file with missing persons databases. You will get a match within days. Why? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why are you telling me this now? Why not take this to your grave? Why put this on me? Because you deserve to know the truth, Dad said, opening his eyes one more time. And because your biological family deserves to know you are alive. What you do with this information is up to you. But I could not die knowing you would never have the choice. I could not steal that from you too. I have already stolen enough. He closed his eyes again, and his breathing became more labored. The hospice nurse came in and adjusted his morphine drip. She gave me a look that said we did not have much time left. I sat back down and took his hand again, even though every cell in my body wanted to run as far away as possible. "I loved you, Marcus," he whispered. "Whatever else was wrong about what I did, that part was real. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, even though I had no right to you." "I know," I said, and I was crying now, two hard, painful sobs that felt like they were being ripped from somewhere deep inside me. "I know you did, Dad." He died 47 minutes later. Mom and I were both there, holding his hands, as his breathing became slower and slower, and then finally just stopped. The hospice nurse checked for a pulse, looked at the clock, and quietly noted the time of death, 3:14 a.m., November 15th, the day my old life ended and something new and terrifying began. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements, condolence calls, and well-meaning neighbors bringing casseroles. I moved like a robot through all of it, shaking hands, accepting hugs, listening to people tell stories about what a good man Michael Sullivan had been. And he had been a good man in so many ways. He had worked hard his entire life, never missed a parent-teacher conference, coached my little league team, taught me how to change a tire and balance a checkbook and treat people with respect. But he had also built our entire family on a foundation of lies and theft. 3 days after the funeral, when Mom had finally stopped crying long enough to fall into an exhausted sleep, I went up to the attic. It was cold and dusty, filled with boxes of old clothes and Christmas decorations and my childhood toys. I found the insulation in the northwest corner and pulled it back. Behind it was a small fireproof lockbox. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was my entire stolen life, documented with the meticulous care of someone who could not quite let go of the truth even as they ran from it. There was a hospital bracelet with the name Baby Boy Thornton on it. Newspaper clippings from November 16, 19 years ago, with headlines like "Newborn Vanishes from Boston General Hospital" and "Thornton Family Offers $1 Million Reward for Missing Infant." There were printed articles from years later, showing Richard and Elizabeth Thornton at fundraisers for missing children, always with a picture of me as a baby, an age-progressed photo of what I might look like as I grew older. The age-progressed photos were eerily accurate. At age 5, they had predicted I would have thick, dark hair and a serious expression. At age 10, they showed a boy with my same narrow nose and strong jawline. At age 15, the digital rendering could have been my actual school photo. Someone had been paying very close attention, using James's growth as a template to imagine what his missing twin might look like. There was a birth certificate, not the one Michael had somehow forged for me, listing himself and Sarah as my parents, but what looked like a photocopy of my original birth certificate from the hospital. Name: Marcus James Thornton. Parents: Richard Allen Thornton and Elizabeth Grace Thornton. Time of birth: 11:57 p.m. Weight: 6 pounds 4 ounces. Twin B. Baby Boy Thornton, who would grow up to be James, was Twin A, born at 11:51 p.m. I sat on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by the evidence of my true identity, and cried until I had no tears left. Then I did what any 19-year-old would do in the year 2024. I pulled out my phone and started searching. Richard Thornton was 53 years old, a self-made tech billionaire who had started Thornton Technologies in his garage when he was in his 20s and built it into a company worth over $3 billion. Elizabeth Thornton was 51, a former attorney who now ran the Thornton Foundation, focusing on issues related to missing children and family reunification. They lived in a mansion in Brookline, one of the wealthiest suburbs of Boston. They had one child, James Alexander Thornton, 19 years old, attending Harvard, majoring in computer science. I found James's Instagram account. It was not hard. He had over 20,000 followers, the kind of polished social media presence that comes from growing up wealthy and connected. His feed was full of photos from Harvard, spring break trips to places I had only seen in movies, pictures with his parents at charity galas. But what stopped my heart was how much he looked like me. We were not identical anymore. Not after 19 years of different lives and experiences. But the resemblance was undeniable. We had the same dark brown hair, though his was professionally styled while mine was just a basic cut from the cheap place near campus. The same brown eyes, though his seemed more confident, less worried. The same build, though he was probably 20 pounds heavier, with the kind of muscle that comes from having a personal trainer and time to work out instead of juggling 2 part-time jobs. But there were differences too. He smiled more easily in his photos, like someone who had never had to worry about money or wonder if his family could afford to keep the heat on during Boston winters. His clothes were designer brands I recognized from stores I had walked past but never entered. His Christmas photo showed him in a living room bigger than my entire apartment, with a tree that had to be at least 12 feet tall. I scrolled back through his feed, going back months and then years. There were pictures of family vacations to Europe, sailing trips, gallery openings, and in the background of so many photos, usually not the main subject, but always there was an empty space. A chair at the dinner table with no one sitting in it. A place setting with no food. In one Christmas photo, from 3 years ago, there was a stocking hanging on an elaborate mantle with the name Marcus embroidered on it. My name. The name I had been given at birth, that Michael and Sarah had kept when they stole me, probably because I was already responding to it by the time they got me home. The Thornton family had never forgotten me. They had kept a space for me in their lives, year after year, never knowing if I would ever fill it. And I had been living 20 minutes away in Dorchester, wearing second-hand clothes and taking out student loans, while my biological family had millions of dollars and resources and connections that could have given me an entirely different life. I felt anger then, hot and bitter and overwhelming. Anger at Michael for stealing me. Anger at Sarah for keeping me. Anger at the universe for this cosmic joke, where I had struggled for every opportunity, while my twin brother had been handed a silver spoon. But underneath the anger was something more complicated. Grief for the life I might have had. Fear about what would happen when the truth came out, and an aching, complicated love for the parents who had raised me, even though they had built our family on the worst kind of betrayal. I took the hospital bracelet and went to a CVS that was open 24 hours. I bought a DNA testing kit, the kind marketed for ancestry and genetic health information, but I knew what I was really using it for. I went back to my dorm room, filled out the forms, swabbed my cheek, and mailed it before I could change my mind. The website said results took 2 to 4 weeks, but for an additional fee, I could get them in 5 to 7 business days. I paid the extra money with the credit card I used for emergencies, figuring this qualified. The waiting was torture. I went through the motions of classes and work, but I felt like I was walking through a fog. My roommate kept asking if I was okay, if I was grieving my dad, if I needed to talk. I told him I just needed time, which was technically true, but completely inadequate to explain what I was actually going through. Sarah, the woman who had raised me and who I could not stop thinking of as my mother, even though I now knew she was not, called me every day. She wanted to talk about funeral expenses, about sorting through Michael's things, about her plans to move to a smaller apartment. But mostly she wanted to know if I was okay, if I was angry at her, if I could ever forgive her. I told her I needed time for that too. She cried every time we talked, and I hardened a little piece of my heart against her tears because I could not afford to soften. Not yet. The DNA results came back on a Tuesday afternoon, 6 days after I sent in my sample. I was sitting in the library, supposedly studying for a biology midterm, when the email notification popped up on my phone. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone as I logged into the account. The ancestry information was interesting but expected. 42% British and Irish, 28% French and German, 19% Scandinavian, 11% broadly European. But that was not what I was looking for. I scrolled down to the section on relative matches, where the DNA testing company compared your results to everyone else in their database. The first match was listed as a close family member, first-degree relative. Predicted relationship, twin or full sibling. Name, James A. T. Confidence level, 99.9%. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. This was real. All of it was real. I was not Marcus Sullivan, working-class kid from Dorchester who had clawed his way into pre-med on scholarships and loans. I was Marcus Thornton, stolen twin, missing heir, the son of billionaires who had never stopped looking for me. Below James's name were two more matches. Richard Thornton, predicted relationship, parent. Elizabeth Thornton, predicted relationship, parent. Both of them had apparently submitted their DNA years ago, probably to every database that existed, hoping against hope that someday it might lead them to their missing child. I sat in that library for 3 hours, staring at my phone, watching as my entire identity rearranged itself around this new truth. Students came and went around me, worried about exams and relationships and part-time jobs, normal 19-year-old problems. I would have given anything to have those problems again instead of this. Finally, as the library was closing, I made a decision. I could not do this alone anymore. I needed help, the kind of help that required expertise I did not have. I needed a lawyer. The university had a legal clinic for students, but this was way beyond parking tickets and landlord disputes. I needed someone who specialized in family law, identity fraud, maybe even criminal law, since what Michael had done was technically kidnapping, even if he was now beyond prosecution. I called the one person I knew who might be able to help. Professor Jennifer Walsh taught my medical ethics class. She was in her 50s, sharp and no-nonsense, with a law degree and a medical degree and absolutely no patience for bullshit. I had gone to her office hours a few times to discuss cases we were studying in class, and she had mentioned that she used to practice family law before going into academia. I sent her an email asking if I could meet with her about a personal legal issue. She responded within an hour, asking if I was in immediate danger. I told her no, but that it was urgent and complicated. She told me to come to her office the next morning before her 9 a.m. class. When I walked into her office the next day, she took one look at my face and closed the door behind me. "Marcus, you look like you have not slept in days. Sit down and tell me what is going on." I sat, and then I told her everything. The deathbed confession, the box in the attic, the DNA test results, the discovery of my biological family living just miles away. I showed her the hospital bracelet, the birth certificate, the newspaper clippings. I showed her the DNA results on my phone. Professor Walsh listened to the entire story without interrupting, her expression getting more serious with every detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming on her desk in a way that I had learned meant she was thinking hard about something complicated. "Marcus," she finally said, "this is one of the most extraordinary situations I have encountered in 25 years of practicing and teaching law. What you are describing is a kidnapping case that has been cold for 19 years. This is going to involve family law, criminal law, identity law, and quite possibly estate law given the Thornton family's wealth. This is going to be a media circus. This is going to change your life in ways you cannot even imagine yet." "I know," I said, "but I cannot just pretend I do not know the truth. Can I?" "No," she agreed. "You cannot. And ethically, you probably should not. The Thornton family has a right to know their son is alive. But you also have rights here, Marcus. You are 19 years old. You are legally an adult. You get to decide how and when and under what circumstances this information comes out. You get to decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want with your biological family. You get to decide whether to press charges against Sarah Sullivan as an accessory to kidnapping. She is my mom, I said automatically, then corrected myself. She was my mom. She raised me. She loved me. I cannot send her to prison. That may not be your choice to make once law enforcement is involved, Professor Walsh warned. And they will be involved, Marcus. Once you make contact with the Thorntons and they verify your identity, the FBI will reopen this case. It is a federal kidnapping case. There will be investigations. Sarah will be questioned. Her role in keeping you will be examined. The statute of limitations for federal kidnapping is unlimited. Even though Michael is dead, they may still want to pursue charges against Sarah. I felt sick again. Is there any way to do this that does not destroy everyone's lives? I do not know, she said honestly. But what I can do is help you find a lawyer who specializes in family reunification cases, someone who can advocate for you and help you navigate what is going to be an incredibly complex situation. And Marcus, I strongly suggest you do not make contact with the Thorntons on your own. Let a lawyer facilitate that first meeting. There are going to be so many emotions involved, and you need someone there whose job is to protect your interests. She made some calls while I sat in her office, my leg bouncing nervously. Within an hour, she had set up a meeting for me with a lawyer named David Chun, who specialized in exactly these kinds of cases. He agreed to see me that afternoon on an emergency basis. David Chen's office was in downtown Boston, in one of those tall glass buildings that I usually only saw from a distance. The elevator ride up to the 23rd floor felt like ascending to another world. His office had a view of the harbor and furniture that probably cost more than Sarah's car. But Chun himself was surprisingly down to earth when he greeted me. About 40 years old with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Professor Walsh filled me in on the basics, he said as we sat down. But I want to hear it from you in your own words, everything that has happened. So I told the story again. It did not get any easier the second time. He listened carefully, taking notes, asking clarifying questions about dates and details. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Marcus, before we go any further, I need to be clear about what my role will be here. I will be your attorney, which means my loyalty is to you and your interests, not the Thorntons, not Sarah Sullivan, only you. Everything you tell me is protected by attorney-client privilege. My job is to help you navigate this situation in whatever way you decide is best for you. Do you understand? Yes, I said. Good. Now, I am going to ask you some hard questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. First, what do you want to happen here? Do you want to meet your biological family? Do you want a relationship with them? Do you want to protect Sarah from prosecution? Do you want financial compensation for being raised in poverty while your family had enormous resources? You need to think about your goals before we move forward. I had been thinking about almost nothing else for days, but putting it into words was still difficult. I want to meet them, I said slowly. The Thorntons. I want to know what my life might have been. I want to meet James, my twin brother. I want to understand who I would have been if I had been raised as Marcus Thornton instead of Marcus Sullivan. But I also do not want to destroy Sarah's life. She has already lost her husband. She made a terrible choice 19 years ago, but she also loved me and raised me as well as she could with limited resources. And I do not want money. I mean, obviously it would be easier to not have student loans, but I do not want them to think I am coming forward just because they are wealthy. Those are all reasonable wants, Chin said. Here is what I suggest. We contact the Thorntons through their attorney. I happen to know they have a law firm on retainer that has been handling the missing child case all these years. We provide them with enough information to verify your identity, the DNA results, and a few key pieces of evidence. We propose a supervised initial meeting in a neutral location with myself and their attorney present. We discuss ground rules before anyone meets face-to-face. How does that sound? Terrifying, I admitted, but necessary. It will be terrifying, he agreed. This is probably one of the most emotionally intense situations you will ever experience. But I will be there to make sure it happens in a way that protects you. It took 2 days to set everything up. Chin contacted the Thornton family's attorney, a senior partner at one of Boston's most prestigious firms. The attorney was, according to Chun, both shocked and professionally skeptical. Apparently, the Thorntons had been approached multiple times over the years by people claiming to be their missing son, con artists hoping to exploit a grieving family's desperation. Every claim had been investigated and debunked. The attorney agreed to look at our evidence, but warned that they would require extensive verification before even considering a meeting. Chin sent over copies of the hospital bracelet, my DNA results showing the match with James and both parents, photographs of me, and a detailed written statement I had prepared describing Michael's deathbed confession. Then we waited. The call came late that night. I was in my dorm room, supposedly studying, but actually just staring at my textbook without processing any words, when my phone rang with Chen's number. "Marcus, are you sitting down?" "Yes." "What is going on?" "The Thorntons' attorney called me 10 minutes ago. They have compared your DNA results to theirs. You are a match. They have compared your photographs to James and to their own features. The resemblance is unmistakable. They have brought in a forensic expert who examined the hospital bracelet and confirmed it is authentic and consistent with bracelets used at Boston General in 2005. They believe you are their son, Marcus, and they want to meet you as soon as possible. I had known this moment was coming, had prepared myself for it, but hearing the actual words made it real in a way that nothing else had. When? They are proposing this Friday afternoon, 3 days from now. Neutral location, my office conference room if you are comfortable with that. Just Richard and Elizabeth, not James. They want to meet you first before introducing you to your brother. They want to be sure this is real before they put James through the emotional intensity of meeting his twin after believing for 19 years that you were gone. That makes sense, I said, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Yes. Okay. Friday. Marcus, there is something else you need to know. The Thorntons have already contacted the FBI. This is now an active investigation again. Federal agents will want to interview you, and they will definitely want to interview Sarah Sullivan. I have advised the Thorntons' attorney that you are willing to cooperate fully, but that you are invoking your right to have counsel present for any official interviews. I will be with you every step of the way. What about Sarah? I asked. What is going to happen to her? I honestly do not know, Chin said. That will depend on many factors. What she knew, and when she knew it, her level of culpability, whether the prosecutor believes charges are warranted after all this time. But Marcus, you need to understand something. Once this information is out, you will not be able to control what happens next. The legal system will take over. Sarah may face consequences regardless of what you want. I called Sarah after I hung up with Chun. She answered on the first ring, like she had been waiting by the phone. Mom, I said, and it was the first time I had called her that since learning the truth. We need to talk. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Chun had me write out everything I remembered from Michael's confession, every detail about the box in the attic, everything I had found in my research about the Thorntons. He prepared me for what to expect in the meeting, warning me that there would likely be overwhelming emotions from everyone involved. He also prepared me for the FBI interviews that would inevitably follow, helping me understand my rights and what I was and was not obligated to say. I had a long, painful conversation with Sarah. I told her about the DNA results, about the upcoming meeting with the Thorntons, about the FBI investigation. She cried so hard I thought she might make herself sick. She begged me to forgive her, told me she had lived with the guilt every day, said she had tried to tell herself she was giving me a better life, even though she knew that was a lie to make herself feel better about the unforgivable things she had done. I do not know if I can forgive you yet, I told her honestly, but I do not hate you either. You were my mother for 19 years, and that is real even if it was also built on a lie. I do not want you to go to prison, but I also cannot control what happens now. The FBI is going to want to talk to you. Chin says you should get a lawyer. I know, she whispered. I have already called someone. Marcus, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I know you are, I said, but sorry does not change anything. Friday arrived feeling both too soon and like it had taken forever to get there. I put on the one good suit I owned, bought on sale for job interviews. It did not fit quite right, and was clearly inexpensive compared to what the Thorntons would be wearing, but it was the best I had. Chan met me outside his building, took one look at me, and squeezed my shoulder. You are going to be okay, he said. Remember, you do not have to make any decisions today. This is just a first meeting. You can take all the time you need to figure out what you want your relationship with them to be. We went up to his office. The conference room had been set up carefully, like a stage for the most important performance of my life. Water bottles on the table, a box of tissues. Chan had strategically arranged the seating so that I would not be directly across from the Thorntons, which he said would feel too confrontational. Instead, we would all be on the same side of the table, which was supposed to feel more collaborative and less adversarial. The Thorntons arrived exactly on time. I heard voices in the hallway, Chen's assistant greeting them, and then the conference room door opened. And there they were, my biological parents, the people who had been looking for me for 19 years. Richard Thornton was tall, maybe 6'2", with the same dark hair I had, though his was shot through with silver at the temples. He wore a suit that probably cost more than all my furniture combined. His eyes, the same brown as mine, were red-rimmed like he had been crying. Elizabeth Thornton was beautiful in that polished way of wealthy older women, blonde hair in an elegant updo, a dress that was simple but clearly expensive. She had a hand over her mouth, and she was crying openly. Marcus, she said, and her voice broke on my name. They both stood frozen in the doorway, staring at me like they were afraid I might disappear if they moved. I stood up awkwardly, not sure what the protocol was for meeting the parents who had been stolen from you. Do you shake hands? Hug? Stand there like an idiot? Elizabeth made the decision for all of us. She crossed the room in 4 quick steps and pulled me into a tight hug. I felt her body shaking with sobs against me, felt her hands clutching at my shoulders like she was trying to convince herself I was real. Richard came up behind her and wrapped his arms around both of us, and I stood there in the embrace of these strangers who were not strangers at all, feeling emotions too big and complicated to name. Our baby, Elizabeth kept saying. Our baby. You are alive. You are here. You are real. Chan and the Thorntons' attorney, a woman named Patricia Morrison, diplomatically stepped out of the room to give us a few minutes. When the Thorntons finally released me, we all sat down, and for a long moment, nobody knew what to say. We just looked at each other, taking in features and gestures, and trying to find the lost 19 years in each other's faces. You look just like James, Richard finally said, his voice rough with emotion. I mean, we always knew you would, but seeing it in person, it is incredible. You have his nose, his chin, Elizabeth's eyes, my hair. I have seen his Instagram. I admitted. "I know we look alike." "He does not know yet," Elizabeth said quickly. "We wanted to meet you first, to be sure, before we put him through this. He has grieved for you his whole life. Every birthday, he would light a candle for you. Every Christmas, there is a stocking with your name. When he was little, he used to tell people at school that he had a twin brother who was lost, but that we would find you someday. The other kids thought he was making it up." Tears were streaming down my face now, and I did not bother to wipe them away. I had no idea. I thought I was just Marcus Sullivan, nobody special, struggling to pay for college. I had no idea that somewhere there was a whole family waiting for me. "We never stopped looking," Richard said. "The foundation, the reward money, the private investigators. We have spent millions over the years. Every lead, no matter how unlikely, we followed it. We always believed you were out there somewhere. We just never imagined you were so close." The next hour was a flood of information from both sides. They told me about the night I was taken, how Elizabeth had been recovering from the C-section while Richard made phone calls to family, how a nurse had come to check on James and realized his twin was missing, the panic, the lockdown, the police investigation that went nowhere because Michael had been so careful and lucky, the years of anguish, the marriage counseling they had needed to survive the grief, the way they had tried to give James a normal childhood despite the shadow of a missing twin. I told them about growing up in Dorchester, about Michael and Sarah doing the best they could with limited resources, about winning scholarships to Boston University, working 2 jobs to help with tuition, studying pre-med because I wanted to help people. I showed them pictures on my phone of my graduation from high school basketball games, the apartment where I grew up. They looked at each photo like it was a precious artifact, grieving for every moment they had missed. "I am so sorry you had to struggle," Elizabeth said, her voice thick with anger and pain. "You should have had everything, every opportunity, every advantage. Instead, you were working minimum wage jobs and stressing about student loans while we had all these resources sitting unused because we did not know where you were." "I turned out okay," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if that was true. How much easier would my life have been with their money and connections? How much less stress? How many more opportunities? Michael and Sarah loved me. They were wrong to take me, unforgivably wrong, but they did love me in their own messed up way. "The woman who kept you," Patricia Morrison interjected, speaking for the first time, Sarah Sullivan. "She will be prosecuted as an accessory to kidnapping. The statute of limitations does not apply. The FBI will be pursuing this case aggressively. You should prepare yourself for that." "I know," I said quietly. "My lawyer already told me. But she is the only mother I have ever known. For 19 years, she was my mom. That is real, even if the circumstances were criminal." "We understand," Richard said, though his voice was tight. "We will not pressure you to feel differently about her than you do. But Marcus, you also need to understand how we feel. That woman helped steal our child. She robbed us of 19 years with you. She watched us on the news, saw our pain, and never came forward. Forgiveness for that is going to take time, if it comes at all." "I get it," I said. "I do not know if I have forgiven her either. I am just trying to figure out how to process all of this." We talked for 3 more hours. Chun and Morrison eventually came back in to help navigate some of the more complicated legal and practical questions. The Thorntons wanted me to move in with them immediately, to leave my dorm and my jobs, and let them enroll me in Harvard with James. I told them I needed time, that I could not just abandon my life overnight. We compromised on having dinner together the next night, just the 4 of us, before they told James. As we were wrapping up, Elizabeth took both my hands in hers. "Marcus, I want you to know something. For 19 years, I have had nightmares about what might have happened to you. I imagined every terrible possibility. You being abused, neglected, suffering. The reality that you were raised by people who loved you even though they stole you is honestly better than many of the scenarios I feared. I am grateful for that at least. But I am also angry for every moment we missed. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone. I want all of that back, even though I know I cannot have it. So I am asking for the chance to start now, to be your mother now. I know Sarah Sullivan was your mother for 19 years, but I am your mother too, and I want the chance to prove that to you. Okay, I said, because what else could I say? We can try. That night, I sat in my dorm room with my roommate, who had been patient beyond belief with my mysterious absences and emotional chaos. I told him everything. He sat there with his mouth literally hanging open, occasionally interrupting with, "What the fuck? And this is insane." "So you are rich now?" he finally asked when I finished the story. "I do not know," I said honestly. I mean, they are my biological parents, so technically I guess I have some claim to their estate, but it is not about the money. It has never been about the money. Dude, you have been eating ramen and working at Target for 19 years while you had a billionaire father. That is the saddest thing I have ever heard. Yeah, I agreed. It kind of is. Dinner the next night was at the Thorntons' home in Brookline, and walking into that house was like stepping into another dimension. It was the kind of place I had only seen in magazines or movies. Marble floors, original art on the walls, a double staircase in the foyer, a dining room with a table that could seat 20 people, though it was just set for 4. Elizabeth had cooked, she told me nervously, because she wanted this to feel like a family dinner, not a business meeting. We were halfway through the meal, making awkward small talk about my classes and their foundation work, when we heard the front door open. Elizabeth's face went pale. "That is James," she said. "He said he was studying at the library, but his schedule must have changed." We all froze as footsteps approached the dining room. And then James walked in, looking at his phone, not paying attention until he was almost to the table. When he looked up and saw me, he stopped dead. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. These twin brothers, who had been separated at birth finally, in the same room again. He looked exactly like me, and nothing like me all at once. Same face, different life, written all over it. "What the hell?" James said, looking between me and our parents. "Who is this? Why does he look exactly like me? What is going on?" "James," Richard said, standing up slowly. "Sit down. We have something to tell you." James sat down mechanically, never taking his eyes off me. Elizabeth was crying again, and Richard had his hand over his mouth. I just sat there, not knowing what to do or say. "This is Marcus," Elizabeth said. "James, this is your twin brother. This is the baby who was taken from us 19 years ago. He is alive. He is here. We found him." I watched James's face go through about 15 different emotions in 5 seconds. Shock, disbelief, confusion, hope, anger, joy, all fighting for dominance. His mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. "This is not funny," he finally said. "This is a sick joke. You cannot just find someone who looks like me and tell me he is Marcus. We have had false alarms before. This is cruel." "It is not a joke," Richard said firmly. "We have DNA confirmation. We have hospital records. We know what happened, who took him. All of it. James, this is real. This is your brother." James turned to look at me directly for the first time. "Say something. If you are my twin brother, say something." "I do not know what you want me to say," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "I just found out about all of this a week ago. My father, the man who stole me, died and confessed everything. I am as overwhelmed by this as you are." "Your father," James repeated slowly. "The man who stole you." "Michael Sullivan," I said. "He worked maintenance at Boston General. He and his wife could not have children, so he took me, and they raised me as their son for 19 years while you all thought I was dead or missing." James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need air. I need to think. I cannot." He turned and walked out of the room. We heard the front door slam. "Should I go after him?" I asked, starting to stand. "No," Elizabeth said, putting a hand on my arm. "Let him process. This is a lot. For 19 years, he has carried the weight of being the only child when he should have been a twin. He has grieved for you, celebrated birthdays alone when you should have been together. Give him time." But James did not need as much time as we thought. He came back 20 minutes later, eyes red, but face set with determination. He walked straight to me and pulled me up into a fierce hug. "I knew you were out there," he said into my shoulder. "I always knew. Everyone said I was in denial, that I needed to accept you were probably dead. But I knew. I felt it. Some twin connection thing, maybe, I do not know. But I knew you existed somewhere." "I am sorry," I said, hugging him back just as tightly. "I am sorry for all the years we lost." "It was not your fault," he said fiercely. "You were stolen. You were a victim. But you are here now. We are together now. That is what matters." The rest of that evening was surreal. James pulled out photo albums and showed me pictures of every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone. He showed me the stocking with my name, the place setting kept at the table, the bedroom that had been maintained for me in case I ever came home. He told me stories about growing up as the twin who survived, the guilt he carried, the way other kids sometimes treated him, like he was weird for maintaining the memory of a missing brother. We discovered we had the same favorite color, the same habit of bouncing our left knee when we were nervous. We both hated onions and loved basketball. We both wanted to go into science, though his path was computer science and mine was medicine. In some ways, we were eerily similar. In other ways, our different upbringings had shaped us into very different people. James was confident in a way I was not, comfortable with wealth and privilege like someone who had never known anything else. He moved through the world expecting doors to open for him because they always had. I was more cautious, more aware of all the ways things could go wrong, used to fighting for every opportunity. But despite the differences, there was something profound about sitting next to someone who shared your exact DNA, who was the one person in the world who had started life at the exact same moment as you, even if the years since had taken you on wildly different paths. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The FBI interviews were intense. They questioned me for hours about Michael's confession, about Sarah's role, about every detail of my childhood. They questioned Sarah for even longer. She admitted everything, sobbing through the whole interview, according to her lawyer, who gave me updates. The federal prosecutor was deciding whether to press charges. The story leaked to the media somehow, despite everyone's efforts to keep it quiet. Missing Thornton heir found alive after 19 years was everywhere. My dorm was swarmed with reporters. The university had to provide security. My classes became impossible to attend without being mobbed. Pictures of me and James together, looking eerily identical, went viral. The attention was overwhelming and invasive. Complete strangers felt entitled to my story, to opinions about Sarah and Michael, to theories about how I must feel. Everyone wanted a comment, an interview, a piece of the drama. I deleted all my social media and basically went into hiding. The Thorntons' lawyers negotiated a deal. I would give one press conference, answer questions, and then everyone would leave me alone to process everything in private. The press conference was held at the Thornton Foundation offices, with both Richard and Elizabeth standing behind me, supportive hands on my shoulders. I read a prepared statement that Chun had helped me write. I confirmed that I was Marcus James Thornton, that I had been stolen at birth by Michael Sullivan, now deceased, and raised as Marcus Sullivan. I acknowledged my biological family and my relationship with James. I asked for privacy. I refused to take questions about Sarah or about my feelings toward the Sullivans. I said only that I was grateful to be reunited with the Thorntons and that I was still processing the enormous changes in my life. The questions came anyway, shouted from dozens of reporters. Will you press charges against Sarah Sullivan? Do you hate the people who raised you? How does it feel to suddenly be wealthy? What was it like meeting your twin? I ignored them all and walked away from the podium. 2 weeks after that press conference, I was sitting in Chen's office again when he delivered news that hit me harder than I expected. The federal prosecutor has decided not to press charges against Sarah Sullivan, he said. Given her age, her lack of criminal history, the fact that Michael was the primary perpetrator and is now deceased, and your statement that you do not want her prosecuted, they have decided to focus their resources elsewhere. She will not face jail time. I felt relief crash over me so powerfully I almost cried. Really? She is okay. She is okay, Chen confirmed. But Marcus, there is something you need to understand. This does not change what she did. She participated in keeping you from your biological family for 19 years. The fact that the legal system is not punishing her does not mean there are no consequences. You need to decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want to maintain with her going forward. I knew he was right, but the answer was not clear to me yet. Sarah called me every day, sometimes multiple times. I usually did not answer. When I did, the conversations were painful and stilted. She wanted forgiveness I was not sure I could give. She wanted to still be my mother, even though she had no right to that title. She wanted to pretend things could go back to the way they were, when we both knew that was impossible. The Thorntons, meanwhile, were overwhelming in their generosity and desire to make up for lost time. Richard paid off my student loans without asking. Elizabeth took me shopping for a new wardrobe that made my old clothes look like rags. They wanted to transfer me to Harvard to be with James. They bought me a car, a brand new one that still had the new car smell. They gave me a credit card with no limit and seemed hurt when I was reluctant to use it. You are our son, Elizabeth kept saying. Let us take care of you the way we should have been able to all along. But accepting their help felt like betraying Sarah and Michael, even though I was angry at them for what they had done. It felt like admitting that my life with the Sullivans had been a waste, that I should be grateful to escape the poverty and struggle. And maybe part of me did feel that way, but another part of me resented having to feel grateful for what should have been my birthright all along. James was the easiest relationship to navigate. We fell into a brotherly rhythm quickly, like our DNA knew how to be twins, even if our experiences did not. We started having lunch together twice a week. He would text me memes and jokes. He invited me to parties with his Harvard friends, though I usually felt like an imposter in those crowds of effortlessly wealthy and connected people. He never pushed, never made me feel bad for not immediately fitting into his world. He just made space for me and waited for me to fill it at my own pace. One night, about 2 months after the reunion, James and I were sitting on the dock behind the Brookline house, feet dangling over the water, passing a beer back and forth, even though we were both only 19 and technically not supposed to be drinking. Can I ask you something? James said, Yeah, anything. Do you ever wish they had not found you? That you could have just kept living your life without knowing any of this? I thought about it carefully. Sometimes, when the reporters were camping outside my dorm, yeah. When Sarah calls crying, yeah. When I am sitting at dinner with Richard and Elizabeth and realize I have no idea how to be their son, yeah. But then I think about meeting you, and I cannot wish that away. You are my brother, my twin, That is real and good even when everything else is complicated. I used to have this fantasy, James admitted. When I was a kid, I thought that one day you would just walk back into our lives, and it would be like you had never been gone. We would be instant best friends, finish each other's sentences, have all that twin telepathy stuff from movies. But the reality is harder and weirder than I imagined. Yeah, I agreed. It is. But I am glad you are here, he added fiercely. Whatever else is complicated, I am so fucking glad you are here. Me too, I said, and I meant it. 3 months after the reunion, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I decided to take a gap year. I deferred my enrollment at Boston University for a year with the option to transfer to Harvard if I decided I wanted to. I moved out of my dorm and into an apartment in Cambridge that Richard and Elizabeth bought for me, though I insisted on paying rent out of the trust fund they had set up in my name years ago, money that had been accumulating interest for 19 years waiting for me to claim it. I spent that year trying to figure out who I was now that I could not be just Marcus Sullivan anymore, but was not quite Marcus Thornton either. I went to therapy, a lot of therapy. I slowly rebuilt a relationship with Sarah that was different from what we had had before, not mother and son exactly, but something more complex. She was the woman who had raised me, for better and worse, and that created a bond that could not be completely severed even by the knowledge of what she had done. I got to know Richard and Elizabeth, learning to see them as my parents rather than just these intimidating wealthy strangers. It was hard and sometimes painful, particularly when they wanted to give me advice or guidance, and I bristled against it because I was not used to having parents who had the resources and knowledge they did. But slowly, gradually, we built something that felt like family. The Thornton Foundation became a huge part of my life. Elizabeth put me to work as a consultant, using my unique perspective as someone who had been a missing child to improve their programs. I found purpose in helping other families, in using my story to bring attention to missing children's cases. It did not erase the pain of the lost years, but it made them mean something. James and I grew closer day by day. We fell into patterns, inside jokes, the kind of brotherly relationship that should have been there all along, but that we had to build from scratch. We were not identical anymore, if we ever had been, but we were brothers in the truest sense. He was the first person I called when I had good news or bad news. He was the person who knew me best, who understood the weird dual identity I carried, who never made me feel like I had to choose between my past and my present. On our 20th birthday, the Thorntons threw a party. It was the first birthday we had spent together since the day we were born. The house was full of people, most of whom I did not know, but James stayed by my side the whole night, introducing me to extended family and friends, making sure I was not overwhelmed. There was a moment during the party when I stepped outside onto the terrace to catch my breath. Richard found me there and stood next to me, both of us looking out at the lights of Boston in the distance. "I know this has been incredibly difficult for you," he said. "All the changes, all the adjustments, the media attention, the identity crisis, the complicated feelings about the Sullivans. I want you to know that Elizabeth and I do not expect you to just slot perfectly into the life we had imagined for you. We missed 19 years. We cannot get them back. But we are grateful for the chance to be part of your life now, in whatever way you are comfortable with." "I am grateful too," I said. "It is just hard sometimes, feeling like I have to be two people at once. Marcus Sullivan, the kid from Dorchester who worked his ass off for everything, and Marcus Thornton, the missing heir who suddenly has everything handed to him. I do not know how to reconcile those two people." "Maybe you do not have to," Richard suggested. "Maybe you get to be both. Maybe the experiences you had, as unfair and as stolen as they were, made you into someone unique, someone who understands both worlds. That is not a burden. That is a gift, even if it came wrapped in trauma. I never thought of it that way, I admitted. Your brother has lived his whole life with every advantage I could give him, Richard continued. He is brilliant and capable, and I am incredibly proud of him. But he has also lived his whole life in a bubble. He does not understand struggle the way you do. He does not have your perspective on how most people actually live. You are going to bring something to this family that we have been missing. Not just your presence, but your experiences and your understanding of a world we have been insulated from. That matters. It was the most meaningful conversation we had had, and it helped me understand that I did not have to give up Marcus Sullivan to become Marcus Thornton. I could be both. I could honor the life I had lived while also embracing the life I had been denied. Sarah called me that night after the party. We had settled into a pattern of weekly phone calls, short conversations about nothing important, avoiding the heavy topics that still hurt too much. But tonight she said something different. I saw pictures from your party on social media, she said. You and James together. You looked happy. Really happy. I said cautiously, not sure where this was going. Good, she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. That is what I wanted to tell you. I am glad you are happy. I am glad you have your family. I am glad you do not have to struggle anymore. And I am sorry, Marcus. I will spend the rest of my life being sorry for what Michael and I took from you. But I am not sorry that I got to be your mother for 19 years, even if I had no right to that role. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, even though having you meant participating in something unforgivable. I will always be grateful for the time I had with you, even as I regret the circumstances that gave me that time. I know, I said, because I did. It was the most complicated thing about all of this. The Sullivans had wronged me terribly, had stolen my birthright and my biological family, but they had also loved me in their flawed and criminal way. That did not excuse what they did, but it made it harder to hate them completely. I am not asking for forgiveness, she continued. I know I do not deserve it, but I want you to know that if you ever need anything, if you ever just want to talk about memories from when you were growing up, I am here. I will always be here for you, even if I do not have the right to be. Okay, I said. Thank you for saying that. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment for a long time, thinking about identity and family and what it means to be someone's son. I thought about Michael dying and confessing because he could not take the lie to his grave. I thought about Sarah living with guilt for 19 years but loving me anyway. I thought about Richard and Elizabeth never giving up hope, keeping a space for me at their table year after year. I thought about James carrying the weight of the missing twin, always knowing something was incomplete. And I thought about myself, Marcus Sullivan and Marcus Thornton, pre-med student and missing heir, someone who had to grow up too fast, and someone who got a second chance at childhood all at once. I was 19 years old, technically an adult, but in many ways still figuring out who I was and who I wanted to be. The truth was messy and painful and complicated. There were no clean answers, no perfect resolutions. The Sullivans had done something unforgivable, but they had also been the only parents I knew for most of my life. The Thorntons were my biological family, and they wanted desperately to make up for lost time, but we were still essentially strangers trying to build something from scratch. James was my twin, my brother, my closest ally in navigating this weird new reality. But even that relationship required constant work and communication. What I had learned over the past months was that family is both simpler and more complicated than DNA. It is about who shows up, who stays, who does the work of loving you even when it is hard. The Sullivans showed up for 19 years, even though they should not have had the opportunity. The Thorntons never stopped showing up in their own way, never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. James showed up every day to help me figure out how to be brothers. And I had to show up too, had to do the work of forgiving and understanding and building bridges between my past and my present. I was still figuring it all out, still learning how to be Marcus, whoever that was, still processing the anger and grief and gratitude and confusion that came with discovering your entire life had been built on a lie. Still trying to understand how to be someone's son when you have two sets of parents and complicated feelings about both of them. But I was not alone in figuring it out. I had James, who understood better than anyone what it felt like to have your identity wrapped up in being a twin. I had Richard and Elizabeth, who were patient and generous and willing to let me come to them at my own pace. I even had Sarah, in her complicated way, still there on the periphery of my life, still loving me even though she had no right to. The story did not have a neat ending. Real life never does. But it had a beginning on a November night when a dying man told the truth. And it had a middle, full of discovery and pain and reunion and growth. And it had a future still unwritten, full of possibilities I never would have imagined when I was just Marcus Sullivan, pre-med student from Dorchester, thinking I knew exactly who I was. I ended up staying in Boston for college, but I did transfer to Harvard to be with James. We got an apartment together. These twin brothers who had spent 19 years apart learning how to share space and annoy each other and support each other the way twins are supposed to. I changed my major to public health, inspired by my work with the Thornton Foundation and a desire to help people who fall through the cracks the way I almost did. Richard and I started having breakfast together every Sunday. Elizabeth taught me how to cook, something Sarah had never had time or energy for when she was working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I joined the Thornton family for holidays, sitting at that table that had always had a place set for me, finally filling the space that had been empty for so long. And sometimes on quiet evenings, I would drive to Dorchester and sit outside the apartment building where I grew up. I would look up at those windows and remember the kid I used to be, the one who thought his biggest problem was paying for textbooks, who had no idea his entire existence was built on a crime. I would mourn for that simpler time, even as I was grateful it was over. I would think about Michael and Sarah, about the choices they made and the life they gave me, about the love that existed alongside the lies. The human heart is bigger than we think. It can hold contradictions. It can love people who have wronged us. It can be angry and grateful at the same time. It can mourn the past while embracing the future. It can contain multitudes. I carry both names now, both histories. The son of the Sullivans, who raised me in struggle and love. The son of the Thorntons, who never stopped searching. James's twin, the missing piece that made our family complete. Someone who has been through something extraordinary and traumatic, who understands both worlds in a way few people can. And I realized something important. Becoming an adult is not about choosing one identity over another. It is about having the courage to hold all your truths at once, even when they contradict each other. It is about understanding that family can be both the people who raised you and the people you came from, and that love is complicated enough to encompass both. The story of what happened to me is not really about the money, or the reunion, or even the lies. It is about the moment when everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down, and you have to decide who you are going to be in the aftermath. It is about learning to carry multiple histories without letting any of them define you completely. On the days when it feels too overwhelming, when the weight of 2 lives feels like too much to carry, I remember that I am not alone. I have a twin brother who would have been by my side all along if we had been given the choice. I have parents, multiple sets of them, who love me in their imperfect ways. I have a second chance that most people never get, a chance to reclaim what was stolen while also honoring what I built from that theft. It is enough. Not perfect, not simple, not what anyone would have chosen, but it is enough. And some days, That is all any of us can ask for. Thank you for listening to my story of growing up faster than I ever wanted to. I have left 2 more stories on your screen, both from young men who learned that sometimes becoming an adult does not happen at 18. It happens the moment your family needs you to be strong. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be forced to grow up overnight, that notification bell is waiting. Until tomorrow, remember, age is just a number, but courage defines who you really are.